Jaws 3, or Jaws 3D as it was released as, is the third instalment in the Jaws franchise. Came out in 1983, directed by one-time director Joe Alves, and stars Dennis Quaid. This is this is one of those films. It's commonly regarded as one of the worst films of all time. It appears on IMDb's bottom 100 list. And I'm not going to defend the film because it is not a good film. But I don't think it's quite worthy of being considered one of the worst films of all time. I have seen literally hundreds of films that are worse than this. And actually, in terms of sort of guilty pleasure material, if Jaws 3 comes on the television, I would probably watch it over some films that I would perhaps give a higher rating to, because it does have a slight sort of so bad it's good appeal to it, which I find quite entertaining. And it's a film that, like Jaws 1 and 2, it's a film that I grew up with. It's a film that I've always known. Obviously, the first Jaws film is as close to a perfect movie as you could probably get. It's one of my favourite films of all time, as I'm sure it is for many other people. Jaws 2, it's okay. It's been a long time since I've watched it, but I think it's fine. It's one of those sort of disposable sequels. It's a sort of classic sequel, if you will. It follows it does all the things that you would expect a sequel to do. All of the sort of story beats. And yeah, we eventually got to Jaws 3, which came out in, what would that have been, 8 years after the first film. And right off the bat, it's an ingenious premise. It's set in Seaworld, filmed in, I believe, Orlando, Seaworld, and basically Jaws gets in and wreaks havoc. I mean, you can't. I mean, that's a fantastic premise for a film. You could do a lot with that. Unfortunately, what they chose to do was sadly not very good. I've always thought it was odd that SeaWorld kind of agreed to this as a tie-in. I mean, I don't know if it's really good publicity for them that there's a 30-foot killer shark in their SeaWorld. I always thought that was strange, but alas, we've got this film, and once you get past the strength of the premise, the film just kind of falls apart. Unfortunately, it is not very good. To go into it a bit more, the characters that you're presented are completely disposable. They're not, you've got Dennis Quaid, who's he's quite an engaging, sort of consistent performer. He's been in some solid films. This was one of his earlier films, when he was a sort of younger guy. But yeah, none of the actors have any charisma. The characters are all kind of poorly executed. They're either sort of inconsistent. I'm thinking of the park controller. They don't really have any consistent motivations. They're poorly written. Some of the dialogue is dreadful. The romances that they try to shoehorn into the film are just kind of pathetic. It's not a very strong film that way, and it's a shame because the first Jaws film was carried by the strength of its characters. One of the best parts of the film, arguably, was the sort of exchanges that you had between Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, and Richard Dreyfuss's characters. The three of them played off each other very well, and you don't get anything even approaching that in this film, which is a shame. They make the inexplicable decision to have Dennis Quaid and another guy in the film be the children of Roy Scheider's character from the first movie. First of all, I don't know how that matches up in terms of, in chronology and age, because they were children when the first Jaws film was made in 1975, but in this film they're like, in their sort of early to mid 20s, and I don't really know how that matches up chronologically, unless they're just jumping forward like 15 years or something. But it's completely pointless. There was no need for them to be connected to the characters in the first and second film. It's just distracting. really, and it doesn't add anything to the film at all. Um, this film, I mean, I think one of the things that people latch on to, one of the things that people criticise most about it is the direction. The direction's very, very poor, but there is a reason for it. When the film was released, it came out in 3D. In the early 80s, there was a bit of a fad for 3D. A lot of films were released with it. 3D kind of died out. It was seen as gimmicky, but then it came back, obviously, the last 10 years or so. Most films are released in 2D and 3D. But yeah, this was one of those early experiments with 3D. But when you're watching it just in 2D, it looks terrible. There's no way to get around it. It really, a lot of the shots just look really terrible, strange, and just not put together very well. I mean, there's the classic sort of infamous shot of the shark at the end of the film, like breaking the glass, and it just sort of freezes in midair, whilst the glass smashes and water comes in around it. The shark puppet itself is kind of goofy looking. And then a lot of the underwater stuff it's shot very, very poorly. I mean, when they're underwater, it's very dark, so it's difficult to get around. But it's difficult to get around the fact that it's dark, but it can be done. I'm comparing it to the first Jaws film, which maybe isn't fair, but I'm thinking of the scene that's considered one of the scariest scenes in Jaws, actually, where Richard Dreyfuss's character swims under the boat, and he finds like a shark tooth, and then the guy's head pops out, and that's a suspenseful scene. It's really well put together. It's a classic like Spielberg scene, but with Jaws 3, there's nothing like that. I mean, you can barely tell what's going on with the underwater scenes, and it becomes quite boring actually, because the scenes are quite long, but you just don't know what's going on. So that definitely drags the film down, and of course you've got all of the shots that are, where something's like sticking out to the camera, but when you're watching it in 2D, it just looks kind of lame, It's a misguided film in a lot of ways. I would be curious to watch it in 3D. I have to be honest. There's yeah, I mean, as a film, I mean, I don't even know how much there is to say about it. It's not scary. There's I think only one person, no, two people in the whole film actually get killed by the shark. And they try and do some interesting things with the plot where, they capture the baby shark and it turns out not to be the real one. But it doesn't feel like there's any stakes with this film. It doesn't feel, there's not the same sense of urgency. They're in a theme park, they could leave anytime they want. There's no suspenseful scenes, there's no scary scenes, there's nothing interesting going on with the characters. Special effects are god awful. I mean, even for the 80s, some of this stuff is just ridiculous. One of the things that I just thought was kind of laughably bad when I saw it this time was they used, like the previous two Jaws films, they incorporate stock footage of great white sharks in the wild, to get around some of the, shooting with the puppet underwater. Now, if you watch that in the first Jaws film, the stock footage of the great whites, in nature, blends seamlessly with the rest of the film with the use of the puppet. I mean, if you look for it, you can tell, but you're not distracted by it while you're watching the film. For some reason, Jaws 3 makes a strange decision to have the shark footage like sped up. So it looks really weird. I mean, you've got these scenes where the shark is underwater, and it's clearly sped up, and I think it jars quite a lot with the puppet, which is of course extremely slow moving and it looks really clunky. And I think I think the reason that they sped up the shark footage underwater is because when you see the shark like pursuing the boats and what do you call those people? The people that are doing like the big sort of human pyramids on the back of the jet skis. The shark's moving at like 40 miles an hour. It's going really fast. And I'm guessing that's why they did that. Sped up the footage underwater. But it just looks terrible. Like a lot of the things in this film, it just looks terrible. It's just, I think the best way to describe this film, Jaws 3, I mean, it's enjoyable as a guilty pleasure. It definitely is, but it's just such a passive film, nothing in it really carries any stakes. The characters are kind of listless. It's like they're not really. It's like they're not really there. They're not really. They don't have any depth to them. There's nothing going on with the sort of horror and the suspense and the sort of things that you would expect from a film like this. I mean, I think Jaws really was lightning in a bottle. You know, they made a film about a killer shark. They got it perfect once. There's been hundreds of imitators, and they've all been terrible, and there's only one Jaws. It's a bit like, you know, what The Exorcist is to films about possession. You know, there was one really, really good one, The Exorcist, hundreds of imitators, and they're all terrible, or mostly all terrible. I think Jaws just, yeah, it'll never be surpassed. But Jaws 3 is interesting. You know, I enjoyed reading about the production of it and the different sort of iterations that the script went through. It is just a bit of fun, a bit of fluff. I mean, it's a hard film to hate. I certainly don't think it's the worst film of all time. I don't even think it's the worst Jaws film of all time. That's a topic for another video. But as a rating, I'm going to. I mean, as much as I think it's a guilty pleasure, I do have to be realistic about it. I'm going to give it a 26 out of 100 because it's got so many shortcomings as a film. Poorly made, poorly acted, poorly conceived generally. And I'm afraid I can't, other than as a guilty pleasure, I can't recommend it.